The note was folded into a square smaller than a stick of gum, wedged so far under the passenger seat that I only found it because my reading glasses rolled underneath, and I had to lie across the console like a woman half my age to reach them. My fingers touched paper before they touched plastic. I almost left it there. I want you to know that. I almost left it there, and none of what I'm about to tell you would have happened. I unfolded it in the parking lot of Ingles grocery store at exactly 11:42 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. Engine running, heat blowing, my daughter's car smelling like her vanilla air freshener, and something underneath that I couldn't name yet. 7 lines. My daughter's handwriting, the same loopy cursive she'd had since 3rd grade, except pressed so hard into the page that the pen had nearly torn through in 2 places. He used Mom's POA. Refinance closes Friday. $180,000. I found the paperwork in his briefcase Sunday night. I don't want this to be real. If I tell her now, she loses everything at once, the house and me. I have to fix this before she finds out. I read it 4 times before I understood I wasn't breathing. I had absolutely no idea. Sitting in that parking lot with a bag of chicken thighs, sweating through plastic in the passenger footwell, that in 6 weeks I would be sitting across a linen tablecloth for my son-in-law at his own 40th birthday dinner, watching a lawyer I'd hired open a manila folder in front of 40 of his business associates. I didn't know that yet. Neither did he. My name is Linda Prescott. I'm 62 years old, and for 34 years I sorted other people's mail before I sort out anything of my own, which I suppose tells you something about the kind of woman I've always been. This is the story of the week a folded piece of paper taught me that the people who love you the most can still be the last ones to see what's happening to you, and the people who claim to love you can build an entire life on top of a lie so quiet you'd never think to look for it. I need you to sit with me for this one. It's not fast. It's not supposed to be. Some of the worst things that happen to us happen slowly, on purpose, by people who are very good at being patient. I live on Cedar Hollow Road, about 11 miles outside Asheville, North Carolina, in a 2-bedroom rancher my late husband Frank built with his own hands the summer before we married, back when I was 28 and had already raised 1 daughter mostly alone. The house sits on a half-acre with a red maple in front that Frank planted the day we closed, and a back porch where I still keep his rocking chair even though nobody sits in it but me. Some evenings, with a glass of sweet tea going warm in my hand. Frank passed 3 years ago in March, a heart that gave out in his sleep, so quietly I didn't know until the coffee had gone cold beside him. 31 years married to that man, and I still reach for his side of the bed some mornings before I remember. He was an electrician, worked commercial buildings mostly, hands like a catcher's mitt by the time he retired, calluses so thick he used to light matches off the pad of his thumb to make our granddaughter laugh. He never once raised his voice at me in 3 decades. That matters to this story, so hold on to it. Before Frank, there was another man, Emily's biological father, a man named Roy Sinclair, who left when Emily was 4 years old and I was 24, working the overnight shift at the Postal Distribution Center on Swananoa River Road because that was the only shift I could get with no husband and no help and a daughter who cried every time a door closed too hard, thinking it was him leaving again. I raised Emily alone for 3 years before Frank came along, courted us both slow and careful, married me on a Saturday in June, and adopted her legally that same fall so her last name would match mine, and there would never be a piece of paper anywhere that said she belonged to a man who didn't want her. I tell you this because it explains something you need to understand before we get to the part with the note and the lawyer and the folder on the tablecloth. When you have spent your whole young life being the only wall standing between your child and disaster, you develop a particular kind of vigilance. You check locks twice. You memorize license plates. You never, not once, assume that safety is a permanent condition rather than something you have to keep building every single day with your own 2 hands, the way Frank built this house. And it also explains why, 7 years ago, when my daughter Emily brought home a man named Chase Whitaker, who wore a watch that cost more than my car and shook my hand like he was closing a deal, some old, tired part of me, the part that had once sorted mail at 3 in the morning so Emily could have new shoes for school, looked at his easy confidence and his talk of real estate developments and his casual mention of a lake house his family used to have, and felt something close to relief. Finally, I thought. Finally, somebody is going to take care of her the way I always wished somebody had taken care of me. I want you to remember that I thought that, because it's the reason none of what came later made any sense to me until I forced it to. Chase Whitaker was 33 when he married my daughter. 39 the year all of this happened. A man who ran something called Whitaker Legacy Holdings out of a glass-fronted office in downtown Asheville with his name etched into the door in gold letters. He talked about vertical integration and asset diversification at Thanksgiving dinner the way other men talk about football scores. He wore cufflinks to a backyard cookout once. Emily used to laugh about that fondly. The way you laugh about a quirk in someone you love. That's just Chase, she'd say. He can't help it. He was raised different than us. He was polished in a way that made me feel, if I'm honest, a little rough around the edges, standing next to him. He always complimented my cooking a beat too formally, like he was reviewing a restaurant rather than eating at his mother-in-law's table. He called me Ms. Linda for the first 2 years we knew each other, even after I asked him twice to just call me Linda, and there was something in the way he said it. Ms. Linda, light and warm on the surface, with something underneath that I couldn't name at the time. I know what it was now. It was the sound of a man keeping careful distance from someone he had already decided didn't matter as much as she thought she did. The first signal, if I'm honest with myself, came 3 years before the note under the seat. Frank had just died. I was drowning. The funeral, the paperwork, the sudden avalanche of forms with his name on them that I now had to answer to alone. Chase sat me down at my own kitchen table, laid a manila folder in front of me with a fountain pen resting on top of it like he'd rehearsed the presentation, and told me, gently, patiently, the way you'd explain something to a child, that I needed a general power of attorney, just in case, so that if anything ever happened to me, a fall, a stroke, anything, Emily wouldn't have to go through months of court proceedings to help me. He'd drawn it up himself, he said, saved us the attorney fees. All I had to do was sign at the tabs he'd marked with little yellow flags. I remember his hands when he slid that pen toward me. Steady, not a tremor in them. I remember thinking, this is what it looks like when someone has done this 100 times before and knows exactly how it's supposed to go. I didn't think anything more of it than that at the time. I was exhausted and grieving and grateful somebody in the family had a head for paperwork, because God knows it had never been mine. I signed it. October, 3 years before the note. I signed a stack of documents I did not read closely. At a kitchen table, still smelling faintly of the casserole 3 different neighbors had brought over that week, because I trusted my daughter's husband, and because grief makes you careless in ways that shame you later. The explicit moment, the one where something in me finally sat up and paid attention, came at Easter dinner, 7 months before I found the note. We were at Chase and Emily's house, a big colonial out in Biltmore Forest, with a chandelier in the dining room that Chase liked to mention had been imported. I'd made my mother's ham glaze recipe, the one with the brown sugar and the bourbon, and I brought it over in the same Pyrex dish I always used, and Chase's business partner, a man named Derek Coyle, was there with his wife, and somewhere between the ham and the coffee, Chase made a joke. He was telling Derek about a real estate closing that had almost fallen through over some paperwork confusion, and he said, laughing, swirling his wine, "You know how it is with older clients. Half the time they're signing things they don't even read, like my mother-in-law here." He gestured at me with his glass, warm smile on his face, like it was affectionate. Bless her heart, Miss Linda would sign her own house away if you asked her nice enough, and used the word family in the sentence. The table laughed. Emily laughed, a beat late, glancing at me first. I laughed too, because that's what you do at a table full of people who are laughing, even when something in your chest has gone very still and very quiet, like a room where somebody just turned off a fan you didn't realize had been running the whole time. I didn't say anything. I want to be honest with you about that, because there's a version of this story where I stand up right then and demand an explanation, and that is not the woman I am, and it is not the woman this story is about. I have never once, in 62 years, made a scene at somebody else's table. I finished my ham. I helped clear the dishes. I drove home that night on Route 25 with the radio off, and somewhere around the exit for Long Shoals Road, I said out loud, to no one, in an empty car, "He thinks I'm a fool." I didn't know yet how right I was to be uneasy. I just knew. The way you know weather is changing before the sky tells you anything. That something had shifted, and I filed it away the way I file away everything, quietly, without drama, in the back of a mind that has learned, over 62 years, that patience usually tells you more than panic ever will. Now let me take you to the Tuesday, October the 14th. My truck, a 2011 Ford Ranger that Frank and I bought together, that I have kept running out of stubbornness more than sense, had thrown a belt on Sunday, and my mechanic, a good man named Dale who'd known Frank for 20 years, said it would be Thursday before it was ready. Emily called Monday night. "Take my car, Mama," she said. "I've got Chase's Tahoe this week anyway. His is in the shop too." Small world, small week. Both our vehicles broken at once. Nothing strange about that at all. And I want you to notice how ordinary it all felt walking in. I picked up her white Lexus SUV from her driveway at 9 that morning. Sophie's booster seat was still in the back. Wyatt's little rain boots kicked under the passenger side. It smelled like vanilla and like something else underneath. Cigarette smoke, faint, old. The kind that's been aired out a dozen times, but never fully leaves upholstery. Emily doesn't smoke. Chase doesn't either, not that I ever knew of. I noticed it and didn't think much of it. Sometimes a smell is just a smell. I ran my errands. Post office, though I don't work there anymore, old habits. The pharmacy for my blood pressure medication. And then Ingles for chicken thighs and green beans, because Sophie and Wyatt were coming for dinner Thursday, and Sophie only eats chicken if it's the kind Grandma makes, not the kind her daddy makes, which she has told him to his face more than once. Bless her. I dropped my reading glasses reaching for my grocery list on the passenger floor mat, and when I leaned across that console, a woman my age, both knees complaining the whole way down, my hand found paper before it found the glasses. The seat had a little gap where the fabric met the plastic housing, the kind of space where a receipt or a pen cap disappears forever, and someone had folded this note small and pushed it deep into that gap, on purpose. The way you hide something you're afraid of, but not ready to throw away. He used Mom's POA. Refinance closes Friday. $180,000. I found the paperwork in his briefcase Sunday night. I don't want this to be real. If I tell her now, she loses everything at once, the house and me. I have to fix this before she finds out. My hands went cold. In October, heat blowing from the vents at 72 degrees, and my hands went cold, like I'd stuck them in the creek behind our old house in February. Everything got slow after that. Slow and very quiet. The way the world sounds when somebody turns the volume down to almost nothing, and you're straining just to hear your own thoughts over the sound of your own pulse in your ears. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I read it and looked again when I finally put the car in reverse, just looking at my daughter's handwriting, at the two places where the pen had pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper. And I thought about power of attorney. And I thought about a fountain pen resting on a manila folder 3 years ago at my own kitchen table. And something in my chest settled the way furniture settles into a room you didn't ask to have furnished. Heavy, permanent feeling. Not going anywhere soon. I did not call Emily. I want to explain why, because I know some of you watching this would have had that phone in your hand before the car was even in park. But I have raised one daughter through one man's abandonment already, and I know something about my daughter that maybe only a mother knows. When Emily is scared, truly scared, the first thing she does is try to fix it alone and quiet, exactly the way that note said. I have to fix this before she finds out. If I called her right then, in a grocery store parking lot, with a bag of chicken thighs going warm beside me, she would deny everything, panic, maybe destroy evidence out of fear rather than guilt, and I would learn nothing except that my daughter could lie to my face when she was frightened enough. I needed to know what I was looking at before I said one word to anyone in my family. 34 years of sorting mail teaches you that. You don't open a package that isn't addressed to you yet. You wait until you understand the whole route. So I drove home. I put the note in an envelope, the envelope in my Bible, on the shelf by my bed, where Frank's reading glasses still sit folded shut. 6 years old. Closed since the night he died. And then I called a man named Harold Jennings. Harold had been Frank's fishing buddy for 22 years. A retired detective from the Asheville Police Department who'd spent his last 11 years on the force in the financial crimes unit before he retired to a cabin up near Black Mountain with too many fishing rods and not enough reason to use all of them. He come to Frank's funeral in a suit that didn't fit him anymore and cried harder than I did, which is a thing I have never forgotten about that man. He called me every year on the anniversary of Frank's death, just to check on me, and every year I told him I was fine, and every year he said, "Linda, you tell me if you're not," in a voice that made clear he meant it. I called him that Tuesday night at 7:15. I read him the note over the phone, word for word, and there was a long silence on the other end before he said, "Linda, do you have the original power of attorney document anywhere? The one you signed?" I did not. Chase had kept the original, he'd said, for filing purposes. I had never seen it since the day I signed it. "Okay," Harold said, and I could hear him thinking, the particular quiet of a man who spent 30 years learning not to react out loud to bad news. "Here's what we're going to do. And I need you to trust me on the order of operations, because the order matters more than the speed. You do not call your daughter. You do not confront your son-in-law. You do not do one single thing that lets either of them know you found anything. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you go to the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, and you request certified copies of two things: the power of attorney document on file, and anything recorded against your property in the last 90 days. It's public record. Nobody has to know you're looking. And Linda, bring your reading glasses this time. Read every single word." I did exactly what he said. I have spent my whole life following instructions I trusted, and Harold Jennings had earned that trust the night he stood at my husband's graveside and told me, "Frank would want somebody watching out for you, and since he can't, I will." I believed him then. I believed him that Tuesday night, too. Wednesday morning, 8:40 a.m., I stood at a counter in a government building that smelled like old paper and toner, and a clerk with kind eyes and reading glasses of her own slid two documents across to me, both certified, both stamped, and I sat down at a little table by the window because my knees had suddenly stopped being reliable. The power of attorney I had signed 3 years ago, the one Chase had explained to me across my own kitchen table, the one for just in case, for medical emergencies, for helping me if I ever fell or had a stroke, was, in fact, a general and unrestricted durable power of attorney, granting the holder full authority over any and all financial transactions, including but not limited to the sale, mortgage, or refinancing of real property. I had signed something that gave someone else legal permission to do exactly what that note described. Not medical, not just in case of fall. Everything, anything, my whole life, on paper, handed to another man's discretion with a fountain pen I don't even remember choosing. And the second document, the one recorded against my property in the last 90 days, was a deed of trust, a refinance, closing scheduled for Friday, October the 17th, 3 days away. Loan amount, $180,000, secured against a house that Frank Prescott had paid off, dollar by dollar, over 18 years of commercial electrical work. A house that had been sitting free and clear in my name for 6 years before that morning. A house I did not know had a single lien against it until I saw the number in black ink on county letterhead. My signature was on the consent form, or something that was supposed to be my signature. I sat with that document at that little table by the window for a long time, comparing the loop of the L in Linda to the L in my actual name on my driver's license. The way the A's closed differently. The way the whole signature slanted a few degrees more than mine ever had, and I thought, quietly, without drama, the way you think most true and terrible things. That is not my handwriting. Somebody wrote my name for me. I called Harold from the parking lot. He told me to bring both documents straight to a woman he trusted, a real estate attorney named Patricia Nguyen, who kept an office above a coffee shop on Lexington Avenue, and who, Harold said, has spent 15 years cleaning up exactly this kind of mess, and does not get rattled by anything. I sat in her office an hour later with both documents on the desk between us, and she read the power of attorney twice, slowly, and then she read the consent signature 3 times under a small lit magnifier she kept in her desk drawer, and she looked up at me and said something I will remember for the rest of my life. "Mrs. Prescott, at your age, when a family member asks you to sign something quickly, and tells you not to worry about the details, That's not generosity talking. That's arithmetic. Somebody has already done the math on what you're worth and decided you were easier to work around than to work with. She closed the folder gently, like she was closing something over a wound rather than a document. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a plan. And plans this careful don't happen by accident, and they don't happen once. I want to say that line stopped me cold, and it did, but it also did something else. It made something click into place that had been rattling loose in me since Easter dinner, since the joke about signing my own house away, since Ms. Linda said just a half-degree too formally for 7 straight years. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It never had been. Patricia laid out what she believed had happened, carefully. The way you'd explain a diagnosis to someone you didn't want to frighten more than necessary. Chase's business, Whitaker Legacy Holdings, had been struggling for at least 18 months. She'd have to confirm this. But the timeline of the refinance suggested it. And rather than admit the failure to his investors, his partner, or his wife, he had used the broad power of attorney I'd signed in grief 3 years earlier to quietly leverage the one asset in the family that was fully paid off and unencumbered, my house. He had, she believed, forged or authorized the forging of a supplemental consent signature because, and this detail made my stomach turn over slowly, like bread dough being folded, the original power of attorney, broad as it was, still required my presence and my actual signature at a refinance closing under North Carolina law. Someone had signed for me instead of bringing me to that closing. Someone had decided it was easier to forge my name than to explain to my face what he needed from me. There's a partner named Derek Coyle, I told her, remembering the Easter dinner, remembering the joke about older clients and paperwork, remembering the wine glass raised in my direction like I was a punchline everyone at that table had already agreed on. Patricia wrote the name down. If the business is failing, she said, there will be a paper trail showing pressure. Debts, emails. People panic in writing more than they think they do. Give it time, Mrs. Prescott. Right now, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all on the outside, while we build what we need on the inside. That became my instruction for the next 5 weeks. Do nothing on the outside. I want to tell you what that actually looked like, because I don't think people understand, unless they've lived it, how much energy it takes to carry something enormous while performing something ordinary. Thursday of that same week, Sophie and Wyatt came for their dinner. I made the chicken, the one only Grandma makes right, and Wyatt sat on my lap afterward while we watched cartoons, 5 years old, smelling like syrup and crayons, completely unaware that his grandmother's house had a number attached to it now that hadn't been there a week before. Sophie showed me a drawing she'd made at school, a family of stick figures under a rainbow, and she'd drawn me with my glasses and my garden, and Chase with his tie, because that's how an 8-year-old sees the people she loves, flat and simple and true. I hung that drawing on my refrigerator with the same magnet I use for everything, and I smiled at her, and my hands did not shake. I saw Chase twice more during those 5 weeks, both times at family gatherings, both times performing the same warm, slightly too formal, Ms. Linda, that I now understood, with total clarity, was the sound of a man who had never once considered me a person whose trust required protecting. I sat across a table from him at his own son's soccer game, in a folding chair, eating a hot dog, while he explained to another parent how vertical integration in mixed-use development was the only smart play left in this market. And I thought about a forged signature sitting in a government filing cabinet with my name on it, and I asked him, mildly, how his business was doing. Couldn't be better, he said, smiling, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. We're closing a big deal this week, actually. Real game changer. I said, that's wonderful, Chase. And I meant every syllable of it as something entirely different than he understood it to mean, and I have never in my life been prouder of my own poker face. Evidence assembled slowly, the way Patricia said it would. Derek Coyle, it turned out, had filed small claims dispute against Whitaker Legacy Holdings 6 weeks earlier over an unpaid contractor invoice, public record, easy to find, and it painted a picture of a business that had been bleeding money since spring. Patricia's paralegal pulled loan documents, closing schedules, and this is the part that still makes my chest go tight when I think about it. A printed email, crumpled and refolded so many times it had gone soft at the creases, that had been left behind in a recycling bin at Chase's office that his cleaning crew hadn't emptied in 2 weeks. Derek Coyle to Chase Whitaker, dated 3 weeks before I found the note. We need the Prescott equity by Friday or we're finished. I don't care how you get the signature. Just get it. I read that line, and I sat very still in Patricia's office, and something happened in me that I want to describe honestly. Because it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't rage, exactly. It was closer to grief. Because somewhere in that email was proof that my son-in-law had discussed my life, my paid-off home, my late husband's 31 years of hard, honest work, as a line item to be extracted. And he had done it in the same casual tone he used to discuss golf tee times. I don't care how you get the signature. Just get it. I read that sentence twice, and then I made myself read it a third time, the way I'd read the note in the parking lot 4 times before I believed it. Because some things your mind refuses on the first pass, out of mercy for you. Emily, all this time, did not know that I knew. I had thought about telling her, more than once, especially on the nights the house felt too quiet, and I wanted, badly, to hear my daughter's voice tell me it would be all right. But Harold's advice held. The order matters more than the speed. I did not want to give Emily a choice between protecting her marriage and protecting her mother before I had every piece of paper lined up to make that choice unnecessary. I wanted her to only have to choose the truth once, all at once, with proof already in the room, so she never had to spend one more sleepless night trying to fix it quietly and alone the way that note said she was trying to. What I did instead in the 4th week was invite Emily to lunch, just the 2 of us, at a little diner on Marymount Avenue, where we used to go when she was in high school. I did not mention the note. I asked her gently how she was doing, really doing, and I watched my daughter, 34 years old, mother of 2, married 7 years to a man who wore cufflinks to cookouts, push scrambled eggs around a plate without eating them and say, "I'm just tired, Mama." Chase has been under a lot of pressure at work. Her eyes were red-rimmed in a way she'd clearly tried to fix with makeup in the car. I reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand I'd held crossing streets 30 years ago, and I said, "Emily, whatever it is, you don't have to carry it by yourself. You never have." She almost told me. I saw it rise up in her throat like a wave about to break, and then I watched her push it back down, the way I had once, at 24 years old, pushed down every fear I had about raising her alone, because I didn't want to frighten a 4-year-old with an adult's terror. My daughter had learned that from me, that particular quiet endurance, and in that diner booth I understood, with a clarity that nearly broke something in me, that I had accidentally taught my child to suffer silently to protect the people she loved, and now she was doing exactly that, to protect me, from a man who was actively destroying the only unshakable thing I had left in this world. "You'd tell me if something was really wrong, wouldn't you?" I asked her. "Of course, Mama," she said, and she believed it when she said it, I think. She just wasn't ready yet. I paid the check. I hugged her longer than usual in the parking lot, and I went home and called Patricia and Gwen and told her I was ready to move faster than we'd planned, because I could not watch my daughter carry this alone for one more week while pretending I didn't already know the shape of what she was carrying. The refinance closing on that original Friday, 3 days after I found the note, had actually gone through. Patricia hadn't been able to stop it in time, only 3 days' notice being nowhere near enough to file the emergency motion she needed, and the $180,000 had, as the note predicted, moved. But here is what Chase did not know. Sitting in that closing, signing documents with my forged name already resting quietly in a county file 3 days old. Fraud does not become permanent the moment it closes. It becomes provable. Patricia had already begun building, quietly, the emergency petition to void the deed of trust on grounds of forgery and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a category that, at 62, with a documented deceased spouse and a general power of attorney signed during active bereavement, I qualified for far more easily than I ever wanted to learn I qualified for. We had one card left to decide when to play, and Patricia and Harold both agreed it needed a room full of witnesses, a moment Chase could not spin, walk back, or explain away in private. That moment arrived on its own, unplanned by us, 5 weeks and 2 days after I found the note under the seat. Chase's 40th birthday dinner, held at the Grove Park Inn, A private room overlooking the golf course, 40 guests, half of them business associates, catered, with a string quartet he'd hired because, as Emily told me on the phone, he wanted it to feel like an event, not a birthday party. Derek Coyle would be there. Several of Whitaker Legacy Holdings investors would be there. It was, in every sense, the room where Chase Whitaker felt the most powerful, the most in control, the most certain that his entire careful architecture of appearances would hold. I told Emily I'd be attending. She sounded surprised, relieved even, and said, "I'm so glad, Mama. It means a lot to Chase that you'd come." I said, "Of course, sweetheart. Family should be there for family." And every word of that sentence was completely true, in a way I don't think she understood yet, and in a way I very much intended. The night of the dinner, November the 21st, I wore the navy dress Frank always liked, the one with the small pearl buttons, and I asked Patricia Gwynn to attend as my guest, and I asked Harold Jennings to come as well, and neither Emily nor Chase questioned it, because Harold had been Uncle Harold to Emily her whole life, a fixture at every family funeral and fish fry. And nobody thinks twice about an old family friend showing up to a birthday dinner. I carried a folder inside my handbag, the same worn leather handbag I've carried for 6 years, the one with the broken zipper pull that Frank kept meaning to fix. The room smelled like candle wax and prime rib and cut hydrangeas, string quartet playing something soft and classical in the corner, 40 people in cocktail attire laughing at the kind of jokes people make when they believe the room belongs entirely to them. Chase stood near the head table in a gray suit, a glass of scotch in his hand, receiving compliments the way a man receives applause he's already decided he's earned. At exactly 8:52 in the evening, after the toasts, after the cake had been cut, after Derek Coyle had stood up and called Chase the sharpest operator this city has seen in a decade, I asked quietly if I might say a few words. Nobody refuses the birthday boy's mother-in-law a toast. Chase smiled at me. Warm, easy, gracious, the same smile he'd worn shaking my hand 7 years ago, and said, "Of course, Miss Linda. Go right ahead." I stood. My hands did not shake. I want you to understand that this matters to me more than almost anything else in this story, that I stood in front of 40 people, a woman who spent 34 years quietly sorting other people's mail, and my hands did not shake. I want to thank Chase for 7 years in this family. I began. And the room settled into the particular warm hush a room gets when it thinks it's about to hear something sentimental. He's given a lot of thought to how things look. The suits, the office with his name on the door, the way he explains things to people so we all feel like we understand more than we actually do. A ripple of polite laughter, uncertain, not quite sure yet where this was going. So I thought tonight, in front of everyone who admires him so much, it was only fair that he finally understood something, too, about paperwork, which he once told a whole table of people I don't read closely enough. Patricia stood beside me and opened the folder. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in layers, the way a pond stills after a stone breaks the surface, ring by ring, outward. First the people closest to me, then the head table, then, last of all, Chase himself, whose smile did not move for nearly 3 full seconds after everyone else's had already gone. "This," Patricia said, calm, clear, a voice built for exactly this moment, "is a certified copy of a deed of trust filed against Linda Prescott's property on Cedar Hollow Road in the amount of $180,000, dated October the 17th of this year." She laid it on the white tablecloth. "This is a forensic handwriting analysis conducted by a certified document examiner, comparing the signature on that deed of trust to 7 verified samples of Mrs. Prescott's actual signature." She laid a second page beside the first. The analysis concludes with a confidence level document examiners describe as highly probable to conclusive that the signature on the loan document was not written by Linda Prescott. "This is ridiculous," Chase said, and his voice had gone up half an octave, the particular pitch of a man discovering, in real time, that the ground he's been standing on has already been quietly removed. That's not. There's clearly been some clerical error at the title company. This happens more than people realize. There's also this," Patricia said, and laid a third page down, the printed email, soft at the creases from having been crumpled once and smoothed flat again. An email from Derek Coyle to you, dated 3 weeks before the closing. I'll read it for the room, if that's all right. She did not wait for permission. We need the Prescott equity by Friday, or we're finished. I don't care how you get the signature. Just get it. I watched Derek Coyle's face at his own table go the color of the tablecloth. I watched him look at Chase, and Chase looked back at him. Two men realizing at the exact same moment that whatever partnership had held them together had just been read out loud, word for word, in front of every investor in that room. Chase tried then to pivot. I have to give Patricia credit. She had warned me this stage would come, and it came exactly as she predicted, right down to the tone. "Linda," he said, and his voice softened, warm again, persuasive, the voice he must have used on 100 investors in that glass-fronted office. "Let's not do this here, in front of everyone, over what's clearly a misunderstanding we can sort out as a family. I can have this resolved by Monday. I never meant for you to feel." "You forged my name, Chase," I said, and my voice did not rise, did not shake, stayed exactly as level as it had been when I started. "You took a piece of paper I signed while I was still grieving my husband, and you used it to put my house, the house Frank built with his own hands, the house he worked 18 years to pay off, up as collateral for a business you knew was failing. And when the law required my actual signature at that closing, somebody in that room decided it was easier to write my name themselves than to explain to my face what you needed. You joked about it at Easter dinner. You told a table full of people I'd sign my own house away if you used the word family in the sentence. You were right about the word. You were wrong about the woman." The room had gone completely still by then. 40 faces. String quartet stopped mid-note. Chase, standing with a glass of scotch he'd forgotten, was still in his hand. And here's where he made the mistake Patricia said would come. The mistake that needs no help from anyone else, because a cornered man always, eventually, provides it himself. Chase looked around the room, at Derek Coyle, at his investors, at the associates whose respect he'd spent 7 years cultivating, and instead of turning to me, to Emily, to any shred of decency left available to him, he laughed. A short, ugly, disbelieving laugh. And he said, loud enough for the whole room, "Christ, Derek, I told you this was a risk. You can't run a real deal off an old lady who barely knows how to read a mortgage document in the first place." Nobody laughed with him this time. I watched his own investors, men who had trusted this man with money, with reputations, with vertical integration and asset diversification, and every phrase he'd ever used to explain away why they should trust him, look at each other, and I watched something shift in that room, permanent and irreversible. The exact moment a room stops believing in a man. A woman near the back of the room, whom I did not know but learned later was an attorney representing 2 of Whitaker Legacy Holdings investors, stood up and said calmly, into the silence, "Given what's just been presented, I think it's appropriate that we adjourn any further business discussions tonight, and I'll be advising my clients to request a full financial audit of the LLC by end of week." She looked at Chase, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "Mr. Whitaker, I'd strongly recommend you retain counsel." Emily had not said a single word this entire time. I found her finally at the edge of the room, standing very still with both hands pressed over her mouth, and when our eyes met across all those tables and candles and half-eaten slices of birthday cake, I saw my daughter understand, all at once, that her mother had known for 5 weeks, had sat across from her at a diner and held her hand and let her push scrambled eggs around a plate without eating them, had known and had said nothing, not to punish her, not to test her, but because I loved her too much to make her choose, before there was proof enough that she never should have had to choose at all. She crossed the room to me. She did not look at Chase once. She put her arms around me, in front of 40 strangers and a string quartet and her husband's ruined face, and she said, into my shoulder, "I'm so sorry, Mama. I was trying to fix it before you found out. I didn't want you to lose everything at once." "I know," I told her, and I held onto my daughter the way I held onto her the day Roy Sinclair drove away and never came back, the way I held onto her every single time this world tried to teach her that the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes don't. You don't have to fix things alone anymore. You never did. I want to tell you what happened after that, because the room emptying out is not the end of the story, even though it felt, that night, like the loudest part. I did not stay for cake. I did not want cake. I drove myself home. My truck was fixed by then, running fine. Dale had done good work as always, and I sat on my back porch in the dark, in Frank's rocking chair, for the first time in 3 years, and I did not cry, and I did not celebrate. I sat very still, the way you sit after something enormous has happened, and your body hasn't yet decided what to do with all that weight. An owl called somewhere down by the creek. The porch boards creaked under the chair the way they always have. I thought about the fountain pen on a manila folder 3 years ago, about how a man can sit at your table and use the word family as a key to open a door he had no right to walk through. What I felt mostly, sitting there, was not triumph. It was something more complicated, something closer to grief for a version of my daughter's family I had genuinely hoped was real. The cufflinks, the vertical integration, the lake house stories, all of it. Some small foolish part of me had wanted it to be true, had wanted my daughter to have the ease I never had. I felt tired, the particular exhaustion of 5 weeks spent performing normalcy while carrying something this heavy. And underneath all of it, quietly, I felt something I did not expect to feel toward Chase Whitaker at all. A flicker of something almost like pity. Remembering, of all things, a moment 2 Christmases ago, when I'd found him alone in the kitchen at 11 p.m., washing dishes nobody had asked him to wash, and he'd told me, unprompted, unguarded, that his own father had never once told him he was proud of him, not once, not even at his college graduation. I don't excuse what he did. I want to be very clear about that. But even the worst thing a person does rarely comes from nowhere, and some sad, complicated corner of me will always wonder what made a man decide that forging his mother-in-law's name was an acceptable price for looking successful to people whose respect he never actually had in the first place. The weeks that followed moved faster than the ones before had. The investor's attorney's audit confirmed what Patricia had already suspected. Whitaker Legacy Holdings had been insolvent for over a year, propped up by increasingly desperate financing. My house, only the most recent and most fraudulent in a string of moves Chase had made to keep the appearance of success alive 1 quarter longer than the last. The deed of trust against my property was voided within 3 weeks, the forgery finding formalized in an emergency hearing where a judge, a woman with steel-gray hair and no patience for excuses, looked at the handwriting analysis, looked at Chase's attorney, and said, simply, "This document is invalid. Full stop. Next matter." Charges followed from the district attorney's financial crimes division, Harold's old unit. As it happened, a detail that felt like something close to poetry. Derek Coyle, facing his own exposure, cooperated fully and quickly, which told me everything I needed to know about the actual depth of their partnership. Chase Whitaker pled guilty, 8 months later, to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery, and accepted a sentence that involved restitution, probation, and the total collapse of every professional relationship he had spent a decade building. Whitaker Legacy Holdings dissolved within the year. Last I heard, secondhand, through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it almost apologetically. He was working an entry-level sales position at a car dealership 2 counties over, driving a much less impressive vehicle than the ones he used to sell people on the idea of. Sometimes the bottom is the only honest place left for a person to start building something real, and I mean that without malice. I hope, genuinely, that he does. Emily filed for divorce 4 months after the dinner. It was not a fast process, and it was not without pain. She loved him, or loved who she believed he was for 7 years, and grief for a marriage does not evaporate just because the marriage was built on rot. She and the children moved into a rental house 2 miles from me for the first 6 months, close enough that Sophie could still walk to her same school, close enough that I could be there most evenings, and some nights I'd find my daughter sitting at my kitchen table long after the children were asleep, quiet in a way that reminded me, achingly, of myself at 24 years old, learning how to be alone again after believing you weren't going to have to be. "I should have told you the second I found that paperwork," she said to me one of those nights, turning a coffee mug slowly in her hands. "I kept thinking I could fix it before it touched you. I didn't want you to know the man I married could do something like that. You were trying to protect me the same way I spent your whole childhood trying to protect you." I told her, "It's not a flaw, Emily. It's just something we do too much of, both of us. We think love means carrying things alone, so nobody else has to feel the weight. But it doesn't work that way. It never did. Not for me, and not for you. She cried then, for a long time, and I held her the way I used to hold her when she was small enough to fit against my whole chest, and I thought about that note, folded into a square smaller than a stick of gum, wedged under a passenger seat, because my daughter had been so afraid of what she knew that she couldn't bring herself to either throw it away or say it out loud. It has been just over a year now since that Tuesday in the Ingalls parking lot. The house on Cedar Hollow Road is fully mine again, deed clean, nothing owed to anyone. The maple tree Frank planted the summer we married taller than the roofline now. I planted a vegetable garden in the spring along the south side of the yard. Tomatoes and squash and green beans. The same green beans I make for Sophie on Thursday nights. And some mornings I stand out there with my coffee before the heat comes up. And I think about how strange it is that $180,000 and a forged signature and a stranger's forensic magnifying glass all led, eventually, back to something as simple and unremarkable as tomato plants. Emily and the children moved into a small house of their own 8 months ago. A rancher not unlike this one. 3 streets over. Close enough that Sophie rides her bike here most Saturdays. Close enough that Wyatt, 6 now, still climbs into my lap during cartoons and asks me to tell him the story about the belt on my truck breaking, which he has somehow decided is the most interesting part of everything that happened, and I let him believe that, because he's 6, and because some truths are. For later, Emily has started, slowly, cautiously, seeing someone new. A quiet man named Robert who teaches middle school science and picked Sophie up from a birthday party once when Emily's car battery died and drove 40 minutes out of his way to do it without being asked twice, and something in the easy, unremarkable decency of that act told my daughter more about him, I think, than 7 years of cufflinks and imported chandeliers ever told her about the man before him. I still drive the Ranger. Dale keeps it running, same as always. I don't need anything fancier, and at this point in my life I've decided I never wanted it in the first place. I only ever wanted somebody to protect what I'd already built, not to convince me I needed something new. Harold still calls every Sunday, and some Sundays now he comes by for supper, and I have started this year to notice that I look forward to those Sundays in a way I hadn't let myself notice before, which is its own small quiet story I'm not ready to tell yet, and maybe won't need to. Here is the truth this whole story was always about. The one sentence I would want you to remember above everything else if you forget every other detail I've given you tonight. A signature is a promise, and nobody has the right to ask you to make a promise you haven't read. It doesn't matter who's asking. It doesn't matter how the word family gets used in the sentence. If you cannot read it, understand it, and say it back to someone in your own words, you are not ready to sign it. And anyone who tells you otherwise, gently or impatiently, warmly or with a fountain pen already resting on the folder, is telling you something about themselves far more than they're telling you something about the paperwork. I want to speak, for a moment, directly to some of you watching this tonight, because I know you're out there, and I know exactly which version of this story is yours. If you are the parent who signed something for a child you trusted, without reading every line, because grief or love or exhaustion made you careless, just once, you are not foolish. You are human, and you loved somebody enough to hand them your guard down. That is not the same thing as a mistake you should carry shame over for the rest of your life. If you are the adult child who found the paperwork, or the message, or the account you weren't supposed to see, and you have been trying to fix it alone before anyone finds out, the way my daughter tried to fix it, please hear me. You do not have to carry it by yourself. The people who love you would rather sit with you inside the truth, however painful, than watch you disappear slowly under the weight of protecting them from it. If you are sitting right now tonight in the hard part of a story like this one, the part where you found the note, or the account, or the signature that doesn't look quite like yours, and you don't yet know what to do with what you found, move slowly, and move quiet, the way Harold taught me to. The order matters more than the speed. Get your documents. Find your own Patrician Gwen. You have more time than fear will tell you that you have. And to every one of you who loved someone the right way and got hurt anyway, through no fault of your own trust, your own generosity, your own willingness to believe the best about somebody who wore the word family like a costume. I want you to hear this clearly. You loved correctly. They acted incorrectly. Those are two completely different things, and only one of them is yours to carry. Here is one practical thing I want you to do this week, because a story like this one should leave you with more than just a feeling. It should leave you with something you can actually use. Every county in this country keeps a register of deeds, and for under $20, sometimes for nothing at all, you can request a certified copy of the deed on your own home, and a search of anything recorded against it in the last year. If you have ever signed a power of attorney for anyone, for any reason, pull that document too, and read every single word of it. Not the summary somebody gave you verbally at your kitchen table, the actual language on the actual page. If anything on either document surprises you, if a name is there that shouldn't be, if the scope is broader than what you were told, if a signature doesn't look quite like your own hand, do not confront anyone yet. Call an attorney first. Let someone with training look at it before you say one word to the person who might be responsible. I promise you, the small cost and the small inconvenience of checking is nothing compared to what it costs to find out 5 weeks too late, folded into a square smaller than a stick of gum, wedged under a car seat where somebody who loved you was too frightened to throw it away. I'll leave you with this question, because I think it's the one worth carrying home tonight. Is there a piece of paper somewhere in your life, with your name on it, that you signed because someone you trusted told you not to worry about the details? And if there is, what is stopping you this week from finally reading every single word? If this story meant something to you tonight, I want to hear from you, because that's really why I tell these stories at all. Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe I was right to gather everything quietly before I ever said a word to my daughter or my son-in-law. Drop a 2 if you think I should have confronted Chase the moment I found that note, and you'd have done it differently. Drop a 3 if some part of the story touched something real in your own life. A signature, a note, a truth you found before you were ready to. And tell me where you're watching this from, and what time it is there right now. Someone always watches these late, 2 or 3 in the morning, from somewhere I would never expect, and somehow that's exactly the story they needed that night. That means something to me every single time I read it, and I read every single comment. If you're new here, this channel is a place for people who have lived through the hard, quiet parts of family life, the betrayals nobody warned you about, the strength it takes to stay dignified when everything in you wants to scream, and the slow, steady work of building something honest back up out of what's left. If that's you, I'd be glad to have you stay a while. Subscribe if you'd like to hear the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Asheville, North Carolina, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, locations, or events is entirely coincidental. If anything in this story matched your real life too closely, please reach out to a licensed attorney, your local adult protective services office, or a counselor you trust. You are not alone. And remember, sometimes the truth does not arrive with a crash. Sometimes it is just a quiet sound you finally stopped ignoring. Pay attention. Stay kind. Stay awake.